stop at that and ask if there's any questions or observations. Still thinking about it. Yeah.
I mean, which is the evolution of this? It's all about relationships. I mean, relationships were key, either positively or negatively, in threatening this or in enabling.
Or, as the point we had in the earlier presentation, building trust.
Yeah, sure.
It is. It's that soft side of business to business, person to person, community to community, whether it's a business community, a social, urban community, rural community. You've got to have that trust there. You can't guarantee the future, but you can guarantee that you will work together as best as you can to come to a solution in some way. Which then leads on to an opportunity to say that if we've now got this model and we've got these smallholders working with agribusiness, what sort of management do we need to think that smallholders need to be able to go from subsistence and poverty into entrepreneurial and eventually into business management, so that they can actually work well with Giles's company or with others. So I'll just see if I can get your presentation up now, John. So I'd like to hand over now to John to talk a little bit about farm business management for smallholders in Africa. John, it's
your title?
Yeah, I know. You can.
Yep. I thought you'd like the picture at the top right there. That's what a smallholder does when he has to obey his cattle passport notice in Kenya. Pops it on his picky. Anyway. The whole of agriculture is based on this wonderful organic cycle that we all learnt about in primary school. And whatever is done, everything that we've seen, all that we've just seen on Richard's slides of growing these crops in Zambia, or all the work in Kenya Giles was talking about earlier, you need to understand and keep in mind all the time the basic principles of agriculture. And actually, the dung beetle is one of the strongest insects, if not the strongest insect on Earth. And it's that part of the cycle that is critical. And it's actually getting that dung and those nutrients back into crop rotations to make your arable crops sustainable in a time of rising fertilizer prices. And again, these principles apply whatever scale you're farming on. The triple bottom line, as it's sometimes called, but ecology, economy, and employment. And you need sustainable management for sustainable ecosystem security. And what we're actually trying to do is to make that do that. We're not trying to supplant the intrinsically cyclical nature of a farming business. It's a cyclical process. We're trying to make the cycle produce more for us by the way we manage it. The key ingredient is management. And people can do that from every background, small to large scale. But what the poor of Africa and other parts of the world are struggling with is the cycle of rural poverty. So you get poor farming, adults too weak to farm well, they eat poorly, the babies are born small, the mothers give little milk, and so many babies die, and farmer stress and family stress is off the scale. How do we break that cycle? Well, we have, as ever, the basic principles of farm management. We've got those factors of production, the weather, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, crucially, to determine the objectives, the expected outcomes of our farming. And we have to get farmers into thinking about what do we want to achieve. If we have no plan of what we want to achieve, there's no point in starting. So where we want to get to, then we have a strategy. What methods are we going to use? What calculations would help us? What advice do we need that we haven't got? And what about the calendar? What does the calendar dictate? When do we need to achieve particular stages of our farming business? And then finally, we want records and accounts and targets to spur us on to continue. So we have to have some kind of review process to assess or evaluate the success or otherwise of our past farming. I always quote this definition of farming, and particularly when I'm talking in or about Africa. I worked for this guy who was the South African businessman of 1980. He was a Lithuanian Jew who trekked barefoot out of the Karoo as a boy. And he said to me, I went into the rag tribe and I bought Edgar's stores, and all the Edgar's stores throughout Southern Africa are down to him. He's no longer with us. But he asked us to do an assignment. He wanted to grow blueberries, actually, on his farm in South Africa. That's another story. But his definition of management, when he accepted this award, it's the greatest of the arts because its medium is human talent itself. And I have seen a most amazing talent amongst the smallest farmers throughout Africa, and I'm sure all of us can testify to that. But we have to ask what our own skills are. There are 3 types of skill in management, A, B, and C: administration, business or entrepreneurship, and communication. And actually, to be a manager, you have to have a bit of all of those, but you need to make up for your own deficiencies. If you say, well, I'm not really into administration, or, I need someone with the fire that we had from Aditi this morning and Giles this afternoon on developing those businesses recently. So those things are always needed in any business, small or large. The Chichewa have a proverb, and I don't know whether they got there first or this college with Dickens. Dickens visited here to see his favourite son in 1868, and he wrote, as he departed, that part of the estate of a farmer or landowner which pays best for cultivation is the small estate within the ring fence of his skull. Let him attend to his brains, and it shall be well with his grains. Well, the Chichewa put it this way: Mufuna kulima mulime kuye murida wamutu, which is, if you are to farm, first cultivate the garden in your head. And so a small-scale farmer has to think. Now, getting time to think is difficult because, as Tim mentioned this morning, the fish farmer isn't just a fish farmer. He's got lots of irons in the fire, and particularly the majority of farm business runners in Africa, small-scale ones, are female. 70% of them in Kenya is the official figure. So they have multitudes of things. Fortunately, the female is better at multitasking than we chaps are. Anyway. All right, Peter. What we're talking about is actually then integral management of resources. And those resources particularly are people. The foundation of the whole thing is people and relationships, which Richard's presentation, that's what struck me about what you were just sharing with the Zambia example. And yourself, your own time, your own stress, actually. Farmers not taking any time off and getting stressed out. And there's every reason not to take time out if you're a small-scale farmer with lots of responsibilities. So that's very important. Thinking about time management, how do you manage time more effectively? What simple technologies or procedures will make it easier for you to accomplish all you want to achieve? What about the values? Are you straying away from the values you started off with in your business? Because if the values aren't right, the business will go wrong, whatever scale it's done on, in my experience and opinion. Data, we're increasingly deluged with data. How do we manage data? How do we sift out the essential from the trivial or the cluttering? And change management, there's one certain thing, change is inevitable. So those values are extremely important, and taking time, encouraging smallholders to discuss together, that's one of the most important things in African culture is meeting together around the fire at night and talking. If you want to get alongside the Maasai, you've got to sit around the fire and talk cows there. And that's where people will sharpen up their values about cattle. They will develop a vision of where they want their business to go. And then the ventures will follow on that solid foundation. Okay. And a key to any business is cash flow and profit. With the stabilizer cattle in this country, developed in Yorkshire, but found all over the place, a composite breed, they talk about the profit index related to that type of composite animal. And then we have the revolution of the mobile phone in Kenya since the turn of the millennium, and with it, the ability to transfer money. M-Pesa, absolutely crucial. Malawi, you've got MalSwitch, where no money, no cash goes through the system to be drunk by irresponsible husbands instead of being devoted to school fees. But you pay for your seed inputs, you bank your cash through your MalSwitch card straight into the bank. I'm not going to go through this, but just to say that Africa has 20% of world land, 16% plus of world population, but it only produces about 3% of world GDP. There's a lot of scope to improve the productivity of small-scale farmers, but there is actually no lack of importance. So in Sierra Leone, you've got 60% of GDP, approximately. You come down to Kenya, it's about 30%, and so on. Anyway, table banking, that's what I mentioned to Giles just briefly in that discussion. That has worked very well in parts of Kenya, whereby people take responsibility for their own savings and then are able to buy essential inputs at the right time and also able to help one another. The group dynamics mean that, you know, if someone's widowed this year, they have funeral fees, they can't afford to buy seed, the rest of the group clubs together and says, no, we're buying the seed, etc. Women do 70% of Kenya farming, for instance, but they own less than 5% of the land, a point you made, Richard, earlier. But the World Bank did a crunching of a lot of data, and women-run farms show roughly, on average, 25% yield increase compared with us chaps, because they're not sitting under a tree, you know, smoking it away or whatever. Anyhow, yes, I'd rather like to have a T-shirt. I'm glad you noticed it, Ray. This is actually a former boat delegate, friend of mine, Tatwa, who I'm still in touch with in Kenya. And this cartoon I first saw on the side of a filing cabinet in Israel. And what a metaphor that is. So small farmers somehow working together can see off the big boys. That's the message, really. And working together on something they're all interested in. So the staple crop in this part of Kenya, bananas, so a banana group. And each banana should have a mother, a grandmother, and a daughter, nothing more. So there's a good plant on the left. The impact, David, you've seen this painting. The impact is increased. If the smaller ones get together, they can achieve enough impact. Essential equipment, it's going to be digital. It's that mobile phone, which I don't yet possess, but may do one day. Actually, I do possess one, but I don't use it normally. No, I do. No, and the home. And the whole thing of whether you are going to stay with handwork or go through here, the worry factor, the capitalization increases this way. So if you can reduce the cultivations, not only will you conserve the moisture, you'll also conserve your expenditure. Or if you collaborate, when you need that primary cultivation with a tractor, you can go to the local tractor hiring unit and collectively afford it. As to the digital thing, I'm just currently reading an interesting book, which I think I've got in the presentation. But this was Matt's cartoon a few years ago. It's only spiders that offer free access to webs. So be careful of the digital situation and be careful of the loss of farmer managerial sovereignty. I and a colleague in Kenya who I work with in Moi University, Philip Nyangweso, we did a study in both Kenya and in the UK amongst farmers and published it in 2020 in the International Journal of Agricultural Management about this whole thing of farmer managerial sovereignty. How did farmers perceive their freedom to farm? We defined this as the ability to make decisions free from unnecessary constraints and then to take responsibility for those decisions. And of course, the small-scale farmer is normally responsible entirely for whether they planted or not, whether they caught the rains, whether they used their frugal resources enough to survive. And I won't go through this because of the time of day, but most of the farmers in Kenya felt they had reasonable sovereignty over their choice of sowing and planting. If you go into a supply chain with a particular variety, you start getting dictated, you will plant variety X on date Y and deliver it to us on day Z. And you are locked in. You're losing sovereignty, unfortunately, if you get into too much of that. Whereas at this end, even Kenyan farmers felt increased problems from bureaucracy and from public scrutiny, urban chattering classes and literature telling them what they should be doing and misunderstanding what they are doing. So farmers of every type, every scale, are increasingly becoming adjudicators of internet-connected data. They're having to decide what is relevant and make choices based on that information. And as Naisbitt and Aberdeen wrote in 1982, we are drowning in information while starving for wisdom, or words to that effect. So what I want to say is that in any farming system, and it's easier on a smaller scale, the farmer's boot and the farmer's eye observing cattle, observing crops, observing soil conditions, these are very powerful things. And you saw in the training groups that Giles talked about, the impact of seeing soil structure as it develops or as it deteriorates, depending on how it's farmed. And the ability to respond to these things, I found, is high amongst farmers. So the percentage of farmers in these different countries, interestingly, in this case, Zambia came out top. There's a lot of entrepreneurship there. There's a lot of incredible survival capacity. And so we need to be in there. Are you worried about artificial intelligence? No. And if you wondered what AI is, here it is. You wouldn't find it in Africa. You have to go to Central America or South America for the three-toed tree sloth, Radipus variegatus. This is the book that I'm currently reading, and I would recommend it if you want a fairly, well, I think a very informed study of what has gone on in Huawei and the various other Chinese government interactions with digital data, the digital Silk Road. I don't have any shares in the book, 2022 book, published by Profile Books. My summary is, Richard, you'll be glad to hear those lovely words, keep calm and carry on farming. And don't forget markets. Marketing is a key part of management. And you brought that out thoroughly earlier in the day. So here's my summary. Watch cash flow, collaborate, use common sense. It's still as important as digital data. Creative observation, and that's where being in groups and hearing other people's opinions is very important. Competent skills, both in terms of the farm management and the basic financial and business management skills. Community values, taking the community along with you is going to help, and cyber awareness. In Africa, it is said, wise people learn from their mistakes, wiser people learn from the mistakes of others. And in the book of Proverbs, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And that is the end. Any questions? I just mentioned this point, that the idea of all this data churning around, it's not free. The BBC came up with a report recently which said that by 2030, 30% of the entire national use of energy in the Republic of Ireland will be spent on sustaining the cloud. You know, just pop it in the cloud. Don't bother putting it in your filing cabinet. Put it up in the cloud. It's not free.
Thank you very much, John. Has anyone got any observations or questions? I love the way, John, that you always take it back to the Bible. And one of the things I always felt about religious texts is that they are an excellent code for life. Codex Alimentarius, how to live. And it gives the examples of what happens when you make mistakes or not. Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Stop sharing. Okay. All right. I don't think we've got anyone coming in. Okay, folks, I think we've now come to the end of this seminar. I think for me, it's been a great exploration of the multitude of challenges and wide range of potential solutions that we can consider for smallholder farmers wherever they are in the world. I think it starts with a recognition about how important they are in terms of the amount of land they use, the amount of food they produce. And although a significant section of that is for subsistence and for local markets, we mustn't allow the dominant marketplace, the global market, to override what they do supply to us. There are some of those who have the opportunity and maybe have the interest in connecting to those supply chains more formally. But I think we've recognised that often the local quality market is the one to maybe chase first of all, and then maybe grow beyond that as your size and scale or your collective size and scale increases. My other observation is that I'm impressed by what has been achieved by the alumni of the IRD SAS programme in whatever form they came through it. And within relatively few years, what significant contributions people like Giles, Tim and Aditi are making to agricultural, food, human, rural and urban development. Great insights and it does make it pleasing for those of us who have had a small role in them starting their journey. In particular, John, you've been part of that for many generations of students coming in either as your managing programs or as a guest professor, giving your insights from around the world as well. So I think it's been an excellent session. I hope I'll be able to download and clean up the presentations and discussions, and where we got noises that didn't work, putting in supplementary notes, particularly Peter's oration of the issues of beekeeping in Africa. And that will then be on the TAA international website. Anyone who is listening to this who's of an emerging development practitioner, do have a look at the TAAI website, do become a member, do publish in our Ag for Development journal, do get involved. And with that, I'd like to thank you all, and I will now turn off the recording and close the session. So thanks to all of you who stayed with us. For all those that stayed with us online, thank you very much for being with us. We've enjoyed the fact that you've been able to share some of these ones. So have a good evening. I'm going to go back and find out what my grandkids have prepared for me for my birthday supper.
Yeah, Richard.
Alka-Seltzers are available on the way home.
Yeah, I must say, Richard, it's a damn shame that Simon's